Welcome to this first virtual meeting from PUEA. It's regarding to the gender equality and sustainability of women entrepreneurship, regional empirical debate regarding to the framework number 1, 5, and 8, the SDGs. Actually, today, we need more work and contribute for one strengthen work and multiple capacities to enhance our economy and community. Therefore, we have an immense challenge ahead of us, although we have the credibility of the different political, economic, and cultural spheres. It's vital to advance the support and research work that you carry out from your different responsibilities. And also, we need more contribute in different countries to guarantee the more representative position in the political perspective of the woman in political spaces, decision making position, and also entrepreneurship opportunities with different financial mechanisms. I am convinced that solid and constantly refining research can create the conditions for the cause of the equality to truly advance and change the life of the millions of the women on all the continents. Equal rights is one of the old promises and a challenge of every country. It's a global challenge, so we need and we must assume and involve, raise awareness from our communities to enhance the equality. Once again, thank you for your participation, and we invite you to continue participating and proposing this meeting to enrichment and exchange the idea. We are going to give way to beginning of the conference. As Vanya said, we have 15 minutes for each presentation, and then we go to the question and answers. As Vanya said, we changed the presentation of Professor Melissa. Vanya, could you help me?
Yes, you can start,
Melissa. With Melissa, yeah?
Women's Microenterprise and the SDGs.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So we start with the presentation titled Women, Microenterprise and the SDGs, Reframing Women and Economic Development in Sri Lanka. I would say Dr. Melissa Langworthy is a senior researcher at LADYSMITH. She is a feminist economist specializing in analyzing the impact of gender norms in women's economic empowerment program and policies, especially entrepreneurship. She has worked with, among others, like Facebook, Oxfam, and UN Women in the areas of strengthened gender data, social entrepreneurship, and gender equality. Her additional areas of expertise include enhancing economic development outcome through gender analysis, evidence-based policy, and M&M analysis, gender humanitarian action, and the political economy of the renter state model. Professor Melissa, may I ask you to start? Thank you.
Unmuting. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Hello from Kuwait. I don't know if I have any other people in Kuwait here watching today, but I send my hellos to wherever you are, wherever you are. First, let me start with a really big thank you to the organizers This is a really amazing initiative, so I'm extremely excited to be a part of it. And I really hope to build on some of the brilliant work that we were introduced to yesterday. So with that being said, so I'm very excited. So the role of women entrepreneurs in the SDG policy framework is a topic that I've been working on for about a decade now. Well, obviously the SDGs are only 5 years old, but I've been working with women's entrepreneurship and with the advent of the SDGs, there are obviously overlaps. And so when we think then about women's entrepreneurship, the extent to which this practice is, or promoting more female entrepreneurs is going to eliminate poverty, SDG 1, promote gender equality, SDG 5, and promote decent work, SDG 8. I think women entrepreneurs are a really great exemplar within that intersection where we can use them as I said here, an extreme user to see how policies are being more or less successful across the SDG framework. And I put a note here for COVID because the gender tracker that's put out by UNDP actually found, and some work that I've done in the Gulf actually found that women gender responsive COVID policies were quite few and far between. Looking at policies that specifically protect female entrepreneurs were almost non-existent. So this is still an area where we are struggling. And really we have these, when we look at women's entrepreneurship, we're especially looking at this idea of decent work, insofar as an entrepreneur is both the employee, the person, right, experiencing labor rights, but also the employer. So potentially someone that can pass on those rights, to accelerate, right, SDGs 1, 5, and 8 through the people that she employs. So I think this is a really exciting topic and a really exciting place to be. But we need to understand that a lot of this ideology is based on the assumption that kind of paid work means empowerment, right? And I think there's been a lot of work out there. This is not new. That says there is there are other factors that support this assumption, but there are also factors that reduce the validity of the assumption. And I think one of the things that I promote in this work and elsewhere is really being explicit about what we're talking about when we're looking at, quote unquote success. So if we take a very kind of zoomed out point of view, policy trends in the last years, we've seen this kind of shift from handouts to even state promotion of entrepreneurship, especially targeting women and especially targeting poor women, especially in the Asian region, which is where much of my work is based. We see this support for female entrepreneurs is not necessarily being equalized with a regulatory environment that actually promotes entrepreneurship. And I'd say this would be across the spectrum, not just in developing countries. Ideas of sustainability, right? There's a lot of differing results when it comes to microfinance programs and the like as to whether or not these enterprises are sustainable. And then there's this idea too that's a little more worrying that the promotion of women's and in my title, right, micro entrepreneurship. So this is often in the developing field, we're looking at the micro, but I would argue that those women are being tasked with enough to call them entrepreneurs, right? They're being the responsibility for development, right? 1, 5, and 8 SDGs that are kind of on their shoulders. And so understanding that, often this informal kind of self-reliance that is being promoted by microfinance or business programs, especially in a development context, may or may not be happening in a context of choice, right? Women may or may not have other economic options insofar as, the size of the labor market or growth or skills match. So understanding to the extent to which they're able to choose to be entrepreneurs, I think these are some of the areas where policy needs to be a little more informed. And really, what does this mean when you target poor women, right? And again, on the microenterprise part of the spectrum, even many states across Asia, there's this conflation by the government as to, what are you doing to help poor women? Well, we've given them access to credit. Well, okay, but again, if we go back to the touchstones of SDGs 1, 5, and 8, what is that access to credit actually going to mean in the wider context? And so really what this boils down to is the idea that political economy matters, right? The state institutions are going to matter, how women have access to credit or not, what regulations are there other gender sensitive policies, right? Care policies. What's the motivation of the state? In my career, I've bounced around a bit. And so from the Asian very development, employment and development focus for entrepreneurship to, now in the Gulf, enterprise promotion is more of a signal of modernity by the state, right? We want to be seen as, as being forward thinking and modern. And so women entrepreneurs become kind of the embodiment of that at this level. So understanding what that motivation is. And also the idea that the state really can impact social legitimacy, right? Especially in cultures with strong gender norms, having the state come out to say, women's entrepreneurship is a good thing to do, can often induce, right, quite a few women to enter into the activity. But again, going back to the previous slide, if some of these other elements are not in place, what is the actual effect of this idea of the woman entrepreneur? So this is really, and then social institutions also matter. So the idea of, is the community okay with female entrepreneurs? What does the family and household structure of this woman look like? And all of this is going to impact the enterprise performance. So again, when we start questioning, is entrepreneurship itself in some way a driver of meeting these SDGs, right? We're, my work is really looking to see how do we account for all of these other things in order to not only understand what the women are going through, but to promote success, right? In the terms of life being better, in terms of development, in terms of actually achieving, reduced poverty and gender equality and decent work. So this is really just to show, this is all very kind of well known for you in the audience with the women's entrepreneurship literature, but just drawing a little bit of attention to the fact that there's a lot of attention to this micro resource allocation at the individual level, right? Business operations, business environment. Again, the individual level, I think, is where we see a lot of the literature focusing. There's not so much out there when it comes to the household impact on business operations or the community impact on business operations. If your customers don't respect you or treat you well, that impacts your business, right? Because you're a woman with a business. And so I think that there are still a lot of areas within this to improve our understanding. And so with that in mind, right, I try to promote this idea of entrepreneurship as being more of a spectrum, where there's the necessity, right? In the literature, you get the necessity and the opportunity, right? Is it a poor woman who just has to work, or is it a startup, woman that's going to change something with her product? And so understanding that, especially for women, this may not be a binary, right? It may be a spectrum, and it may be a spectrum that changes depending on some of these other contexts, right? On the care policies and, demands and household support and husband support. And again, that element of choice. If you're a woman in the rural area of Sri Lanka and this program comes to town and there's really no other employment option for you, then again, the idea of being an entrepreneur, is that really empowering you when you can't freely choose it? And this is where we draw a bit on MER Tassen's empowerment work. So with all this in mind, this is kind of my framework that I like to think of for female entrepreneurship, right? The green, you have sort of the traditional resources, personal characteristics, where a lot of the programming sits. And then you see in the blue, you see a lot more of those household contexts, your own kind of aspirations, social influences, and then also kind of the social and economic context. And then the other thing that I really emphasize here is really that outcome. When we talk about entrepreneurship, when we talk about development, there's an assumption of both financial and social outcomes that are often not specifically measured for and accounted for. And so I think, and I support in this work that when we talk about kind of what does successful mean, then I think that there's a lot of space in the field for there to be much more specificity around that and much more, very clear ideas around what's going to be considered success. So with all that in mind, there was a great opportunity in Sri Lanka. A set of randomized control studies basically established the access to resources baseline for a community in Sri Lanka. And they went through, they gave capital, so money and goods, to different entrepreneurs. They saw what happened, right? It was all very, very specific and formulaic, and they found that with the same amount of capital infusion, men were able to see 9 to 12% returns to their business, whereas women saw 0. And actually, a very small percentage of women actually saw 5% or higher. So we had, I had in this example a community in Kandy, Sri Lanka, where we knew that the resource infusion wasn't the thing that was keeping women down, right? Something else was getting in the way because the men were able to convert these resources into returns and profits. So then I came in and did some research to say, okay, so what else is out there, right? What else are we missing in these numbers? And so we designed the study. It was very participatory because this idea of what else should we be looking at? So I met with kind of SME women, not the micro, but kind of established business women in the community to give a framework. We had focus groups, developed the survey, and then took it back to them after just to say, does this sound like what you experienced? And then there was a random route. So within the community, within the city of Kandy, Sri Lanka, we did just knocking on every 4th door and again, as systematic as we could do it in a community-wide area. So we had 487 interviews, average age 42 years. The demographics mostly lined up with the country. And then I took the survey tool into analysis. So what happened was I wanted to look at the probability of being successful against those two criteria, right? Finance and social empowerment. And so I took the nearly 500 women that I interviewed and I said, okay, who am I going to define as successful and who's going to not be? And then let's look at what predicts that the women will be in one or the other, which happened via a logit model. So this subsistence entrepreneur, SE, is what you'll see. There were, I apologize, the numbers need to be switched on this. So there were 385 subsistence, not empowered women, and 102 transformative entrepreneurship. So that's the terminology we were using. Is it transformative entrepreneurship or subsistence? And to get to the transformative, there were 3 levels that I built iteratively just to make sure there wasn't going to be a huge confounding factor. The first being the financial. So was your business bringing income above the poverty line? Then an objective. So objective and subjective empowerment here are drawn from Amartya Sen's work with the concept. So the objective empowerment was you don't think women should be beaten, right? I see that was a fairly clear. I'm going to call you empowered if you don't think that domestic violence is good. And then subjective empowerment was measured with a measurement of kind of subjective feeling. Do you feel in control? Do you feel your life is getting better, right? This idea of development in a broad sense. And then within the survey and within the data, we had a number of vectors here, just baseline characteristics. You see resource and business. So again, a model that really just looked at the traditional business and resource elements, and then some of the additional elements in the later models for spousal and household support, and then capabilities. So, I mean, in particular, in the findings, this idea of incorporating empowerment outcomes is really important, because we'll see that the differences in what predicted success or not success changed based on that definition. If it was just financial, the constraints to the not being poor were different than the constraints to not being empowered, right? And in the operational definition. And then understanding that the women, again, in that spectrum, the women in each group may or may not have been unhappy with where they were. They may or may not have been seeking change. It might have been enough to just make money for dinner tonight and go back tomorrow and do the same thing. But the realization here then is that we need distinct baskets of policies and baskets of skills, and a more granular understanding of what this enterprise activity is bringing, to really be able to meet those needs on a wider scale. And what you see too is that especially this idea of the within group study, right? Asking the question of what makes successful women different than the women that are struggling leads to some very specific findings that are different than the male versus female comparisons that we see a lot with, yes, there are issues with capital, and yes, there are issues with, training and education, and okay, we've established that, but okay, now if we look at the women, what is making, a certain group more quote unquote successful compared to others? So I think there were some really interesting seeds planted as far as how we conceptualize and move forward with what entrepreneurship is, which can then lead to obviously policy differentiation. And I mean, 4 primary things that came out of this were that, obviously there was a large amount of necessity entrepreneurship. So again, this idea, even in SDG 1, as far as alleviating poverty, not even to the gender equality part. So there's some work to be done here. Again, as I said, the business characteristics kind of lost the significance, but things like social preparation and social institutions were very important. So, the subsistence women didn't expect their business to be successful. They'd never known a successful woman. They didn't know what it would look like. And so the capacity, it wasn't, they couldn't do it. It's that they didn't have a mental framework for this work. But we saw, elements like if they had worked before, or if their mother had worked, right? Signs that the social environment were different, were more inviting, really made a difference. So, and you can see that, in this household and spousal support, if we look at female breadwinner, so being the one earning the money and just progressing on, by the spouse's occupation, right? Different occupations of the spouse had a huge impact, right? Up to 250% more likely to be a successful woman. Whereas, domestic violence reduced the likelihood of being in that transformative group by nearly 70%. So I mean, I dropped the numbers in here. This I think is more interesting in kind of the zoom out, just looking at how there's a gentle shift in the primary factors that increase the likelihood of being in that group. So the first one is the not poor, right? Are you just meeting the poverty line? The second one was the objective empowerment. And the third is the full spectrum. If you meet all 3, here's what's predictive of you being in that group. And so, I mean, so there is some continuity, right? Optimal monthly income, which is this idea of aspiration. I want to grow my business. This is what I ideally will make. It is consistent there, but then we see some that switch. And what's interesting here is if in the not poor, we see the women entrepreneurs really looking more like men, right? That children are actually a positive thing, not a negative. We see, competition being good. We see a high satisfaction. But again, is that this is all I want from this? And so I don't think I can grow. I don't think I can do more. I won't be able to balance my housework if my business gets bigger. So I'm happy where I am. And does that really would that then, again, looking at that intersection, right? SDGs 1, 5, and 8, is that really meeting the potential for women's entrepreneurship in this context? And so these are some of the strong  wanting a child as a decision-making factor. family support, obviously decreasing the likelihood. And then some cultural factors, right? Religion. There were some neighborhood elements as well that were important. So that community support. So looking again, really more than the numbers here, we're looking at this idea that they're shifting, right? The thing that negates, depending on how I define success, the thing that negates membership in the group is it changes. So understanding, if nothing else, that there's this multiplicity of entrepreneurship, right, in various locations, and a need to really find more granular understandings that are gender sensitive. So I have a feeling I'm getting close to time, or moving forward. I'm not seeing any hands, so I'll just move forward. I had some specifics here on, some really significant findings with the spouse's education, if the spouse is temporary versus a wage worker, and then the role of being a breadwinner. And so again, more than the specific directionality in this work, I would like for this to plant seeds as far as understanding the role, the really significant role that these household, especially the household context, plays for women's entrepreneurship, that the business environment, right, the community environment, the idea, the perception that this is a good thing for women to do was actually like the strongest predictor of being in this transformative, successful group. And so again, this idea of entrepreneurship or microfinance as a policy, right, that you can just give to a group of people, is maybe something that requires a little more nuance, in light of these findings, especially in areas where women haven't traditionally taken on these roles. And then from some of our focus groups, there was just support from this, that if she does it, then, the household gets harder, that her community gets harder, she's harassed. Maybe there's some impacts on marriage and the calculus of work and family life that's happening here in these communities. So I think that hopefully this is interesting and plants a few seeds. Understanding this is just one attempt to kind of encapsulate and look through all of these things. But I do think it's a really interesting attempt, and I think it's important attempt. And I think that especially in the policy space, there's some really specific questions that need to be asked, especially entrepreneurship as a state-sponsored and poverty alleviating program, especially targeting women, in light of all of these other elements, right? And in light of the idea that just the provision or the easing of the financial barriers is not necessarily the key to unlock empowerment, especially if we are very clear in saying that we're expecting not just a financial outcome, but a social outcome. And I think just not being afraid to say what that means, which could change from community to community. And I think that's a space that would be really interesting to start investigating a bit deeper. So I thank you all for your attention, and I look forward to the rest of the day. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Melissa, and congratulations for the work that you have done. Now we are going to listen carefully to the presentation of Professor Sadiq Mohammed and Ahmad Mahmoud. They are presenting topic impact of gender discrimination on economic assets, accumulation of the smallholder rice farmers participating in USAID markets #2 program in Nigeria, Kano State. To addition, just a background of the Professor Ahmad Mahmoud, I would say he is a professor of agricultural economics in the Department of Agricultural Economic and Extension, Kano, Nigeria. Currently, he has an additional charge, Nigerian ambassador to Brazil. He has created an academic niche both nationally and internationally. He has more than 30 years of university experience. And also, Professor Sadiq Mohammed is presently a principal scientist in the Department of Agricultural Economics and Extension, Federal University of Nigeria. His area of interest are development in agriculture, women in agriculture, economics. He has more than 13 years of university experience. His degrees are a Bachelor in General Agriculture from Nigeria, Master of Science in Agricultural Economics in Nigeria, and he got his PhD in Agricultural Economics from India. Please go ahead with your presentation.
Dr. Mohammed, we cannot hear you and neither see you. So I think you have to turn on your mic. And also, could you move a little bit your screen, please?
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
My video is on. I don't know why it is on. My video is on my side. My video is on from my side, and even the what are they calling it? The volume is on. So are you hearing me? Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. There's a little bit of noise, but we can hear you.
You can hear me, but you cannot see me. Hello?
Yes, you can start now.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Sadiq Mohammed Sanusi, and I'm presenting a paper on impact of gender discrimination on economic access, accumulation of smallholder rice farmers participating in USAID Market 2 program in Nigeria's Kano State. Actually,
Professor Sadiq, there's a lot of noise in the room where you are, so we can hear you very well.
Okay, are you hearing me now? I think the noise is...
There's a lot of noise in the room where you are.
In fact, there is no much noise, madam, because my colleagues here, I'm on Airbnb, and I've told them that, are you hearing me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, but there's a lot of noise in the room.
A lot of noise?
Yes.
What of now? Is the noise okay? There is no noise.
The noise is terrible. We just can't hear your voice. There's a lot of noise in the room where you are.
Okay. What of
we continue hearing the noise. They are yelling.
Maybe. Well, I'm sitting closer to the what are they called, the cyber unit in the university. That is why the noise is from the cyber what are they called unit, because the network is very poor in Nigeria. So definitely they have to go closer to the cyber unit, and so that the network will be very clear, so that I can reach people. Are you hearing now? Hello? Hello?
Hello? Professor Siron.
Yes.
Yes. Let's begin, but there's a lot of noise in the room.
I should continue.
Yes, continue.
Okay, fine. Actually gender is going to be a social construct, unlike definitely sex, which is a biological construct. And in most cases, women definitely are known to be known to belong to the weaker section of the society, more especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where definitely they are being left behind as a result of a gender stereotype. Actually, there are many interventions that have come as an aid, definitely to alleviate poverty in the sub-Saharan Africa, with women definitely in most cases not being captured or not being focused. Unlike this, you said program, we definitely came with a program called markets, Though market one definitely has been what are they calling it, has been achieved. Now they are in market 2. This market is just an acronym because it implies maximizing agricultural revenue and key enterprises in targeted sites. That is the full meaning of the acronym markets here attached to be said. So now they are in what are they calling it, the second phase, which is we said 2. And this research program particularly target women and youths. And it covers about 27 states are being involved. 24 states definitely are involved in this very program in Nigeria, plus the Center of Unity. So this study decided to focus definitely on one of the states out of the 24, which falls under the northern part of the country, which is Kano State. And the reason why definitely this Kano was chosen is because as a pilot in this very research, because of its cosmopolitan nature and population, because Kano definitely is deemed to be the second largest state in terms of population in Nigeria after Lagos State. So, and these study actually look into how this study definitely looks into the impact, both the effect and the impact, the short run and the long run effect definitely of this research program on what are the asset accumulation among definitely these women farmers who are the major target group here. And the objective definitely is to look at the short run and the long run effect, and at the same time to isolate the effect of this very what are they calling the USAID program itself outside endowment effect. That is the social economic characteristic definitely of these women. To quantify really what is the contribution definitely of this what are they calling it USAID program definitely to the asset accumulation of these women. And in the research, actual analytical tools we are being used. In the case of the long run and short run effect, definitely we decided to use definitely the average treatment effect and chow test. For the short run, chow test was used to see whether definitely in the short run, this very program has effect definitely on asset accumulation of what are they called women farmers. While in the long run, we decided to use average treatment effect to see whether definitely in the long run, definitely this program has an impact on these women, what are they called on the asset accumulation of women. And in isolating, bringing out the discrimination, that is gender discrimination now, to see how does gender discrimination affect definitely asset accumulation of these women. We decided definitely to use Ozaka Blanda decomposition model to see how definitely gender discrimination, because gender discrimination is a structure. And we decided to isolate to see it. And based on the results, we discovered that in the short run and the long run, actually there is what are they calling it? There is this program definitely gender as a factor has definitely effect on asset accumulation definitely of women in the short run and likewise in the long run. And if definitely gender has an effect in the short run, then it has to do with what are they calling assets and control to what are they calling productive resources. Because the major challenge definitely women are facing definitely in sub-Saharan Africa is issue of access and control to productive resources. And the reason is because of gender stereotype, which definitely is a phenomenon. Because there is a culture here in sub-Saharan Africa, and at the same time coupled with religious influence, where women definitely they are being restricted definitely to household choirs. They are being restricted to household choirs. They are not allowed definitely to come out and mingle definitely in an open society like that because of the religious phenomenon and cultural phenomenon in sub-Saharan Africa. And the issue is that definitely in looking at the effect, we discover that yes, access and control over productive resources is a problem, which we decided definitely to look into it from the point of gender stereotype. And in the long run, again, the same definitely scenario came out. We are definitely, because of the gender differential, we discovered that definitely asset accumulation of women is less when compared to that of the what are they calling it, the male farmers. That is the male farmers that are involved in this very in this very what are they calling it? In this very asset accumulation, this very program. And really the same matter was traced, that is gender stereotype, was traced to definitely this issue. And after that, we decided to see how to isolate, because it is issue of gender discrimination. So we decided to isolate gender discrimination from endowment effect. Gender discrimination from endowment effect of those women. And from research using the Ozaka blended composition model, using the Ozaka blended composition model, we are able definitely to see that yes, the contribution of gender to this gap, there is differences between the capital asset of the women to that of the men. We are able to discover that in that very gap that was discovered, definitely we are able to quantify definitely the contribution definitely of discrimination effect to that very matter. And based on the assessment, we discovered that gender differential account for 83.26% of the differential, definitely of the differences between the capital accumulation of the male farmers, definitely, and the female farmers. While the endowment effect, which has to do with their socio-economic characteristics, which is a risk, definitely account for what are they calling 16%. So overall, if we look into the situation, gender discrimination is still a phenomenon affecting women, definitely active participation, definitely in agricultural activity in Nigeria. Despite that, definitely they contributed more than 60% in terms of productivity, agricultural productivity in the country. So now based on this very outcome, the research now definitely advise the policymaker and in fact the policymaker and the program itself that for in the case of the program, we discovered that definitely women being their target and youth, and this research definitely being centered on the women. We discovered that more needs to be done in terms of definitely bringing out women definitely from the what are called vicious cycle of poverty, because gender discrimination is a problem, and the only way out definitely with what are called gender mainstreaming budgeting. And apart from that, there is need for sensitization again definitely on gender stereotypes to let the society know the importance of allowing women to be a key player in productivity, particularly agriculture, because food is a problem. Food security is a problem in Nigeria and sub-Saharan Africa. And since women definitely, they are at the same time definitely household keepers and at the same time a crucial role player definitely in food security in Nigeria, the only way definitely to tackle food security in Nigeria definitely is to, in fact, encourage definitely is to definitely break that very jinx of gender stereotype that definitely is affecting women active participation in agriculture. So, in summary, with the policymaker, as far as the country is concerned, we are still agitating, despite that definitely there is a ministry definitely that cater for women activities in Nigeria, agri and other economic activities. We are still calling on them. This is a clarion call on the policymakers that more programs should evolve that will look towards women more than definitely towards women, and in particular definitely the issue of what are they called gender stereotype, because gender stereotype is what definitely is causing gender discrimination and definitely in, and because with the gender stereotype, if gender stereotype will be addressed, the issue of access and control to resources definitely will go a long way. Definitely in a long way, definitely it will be contained, and food security definitely in Nigeria definitely will be enhanced. And if food security enhanced, definitely the economy definitely there will be growth in the economy. Likewise, definitely the economy definitely will witness development. Thank you for listening. Hello, thank you for listening.
Hello. Thank you very much, Professor Sadiq. Now
Yes.
we continue with another presentation. At the end, we will have a question and answer. But we continue with all presentations. With this table, we included 5 presentations. Thank you very much, Professor Sadiq. So we are going to continue presentation. Now it's turn of Professor María de los Ángeles, Cavero, and Gerardo Pedigali, which are presenting the topic of la creatividad empresarial de la mujer berciana, evitando la migración y despoblación. Para añadir, profesora María de los Ángeles Cavero está colaborando con el Departamento de Ingeniería, área de Ingeniería Nuclear en la Escuela Técnica Superior de Ingenieros de Minas de la Universidad de Oviedo. Trabajó en los departamentos de Fisiología, en Medicina Preventiva y Salud Pública en la Universidad de León y Anatomía, Histología Humana en la Facultad de Medicina Zaragoza. Perito médico jurisdiccional, ganó el primer Nuclear España 2000. También profesor Gerardo Pedigali tiene formación como técnico especialista en informática y diplomado en victimología, derecho y prevención de adicciones. Actualmente completa su formación de estudios de grado en UNED. Ha participado en jornadas, congresos universitarios nacionales e internacionales, así como de salud pública, y ha trabajado como docente y técnico en geriatría. Muchas gracias. Ahora es el turno de ustedes. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Compartimos pantalla. En primer lugar, nuestro agradecimiento a la UNAM y al Programa Universitario de Estudios de Asia y África para presentar nuestro trabajo titulado La creatividad empresarial de la mujer berciana, evitando la migración y despoblación. La presentación es el siguiente: ubicación, medios de vida, minería, agricultura, el objeto de nuestra comunicación, ganadería, turismo y conclusiones. La ubicación geográfica es en la zona norte de España, en la comunidad de Castilla y León, en la provincia de León y en la zona geográfica del Bierzo. Se caracteriza específicamente por pertenecer a la España vaciada. León y Zamora son las provincias con mayor descenso por España en 2020 y se caracterizan especialmente por el envejecimiento, la migración, la pérdida de peso económico y el efecto devastador. Especialmente se acusa esta situación en la población de España en el momento de la pandemia. Observamos en otro gráfico en un diagrama ofrecido por el SACIR, que es la Sanidad de Castilla y León, donde vemos que la población del Bierzo ha descendido el 10,42% en la última década. Observamos también el desplome de las provincias leonesas comparativamente con las otras provincias de la comunidad. Los medios de vida son minería, oro, wolframio y carbón, agricultura, ganadería y turismo. Respecto a la minería, el oro en la época romana, constituye las médulas, hoy patrimonio de la humanidad. El wolframio incluido en la lista roja del patrimonio y el carbón. Las minas de wolframio se incluyeron en la lista roja del patrimonio. El carbón fue el motor industrial de la zona hasta la adhesión al protocolo de Kioto. La agricultura es el principal motor de la zona. Nosotros consideramos dos explotaciones agrícolas. Las características son creadas por mujeres españolas, hijas de migrantes españoles. Una de las empresas es frutícola exclusivamente y la otra hortofrutícola. Consideramos estas dos empresas porque tienen diferente orientación mercantil. La primera de ellas, la empresa frutícola, cultiva 6 a 7 hectáreas de terreno. La cooperativa comercializa los productos de todos los socios con excelentes estándares de calidad. Le permite asegurar la salida de la cosecha completa y el mejor precio conseguible. La cooperativa pone a su disposición personal especializado. Pasamos ahora a la empresa hortofrutícola. Cooperativa creada por una mujer autónoma. Contrata a sus propias trabajadoras, exclusivamente personal femenino y siempre. Realizan todo el proceso, producción, transformación y comercialización. Consideramos dos de los principales protagonistas de la zona del Bierzo, que son la castaña y el pimiento. Aquí vemos unas fotografías de la explotación exterior, las trabajadoras, explotación exterior y unas vistas de la instalación. Pasamos al primer protagonista, que es la castaña berciana. Es de la variedad parede o pared. Son casi autóctonas. Se caracterizan por su intenso aroma, textura suave y sabor dulce. Son de menor tamaño y de color rojizo vivo. Las características morfológicas son: es un fruto acorazado, con morfología elíptica, con uno de los dos lados globoso y el otro más plano, de presentación uniforme, color marrón y cáscara mate, según características de la variedad, con un peso mínimo de 7 gramos por fruto. La recolección se realiza solo cuando el fruto ha caído al suelo de forma natural. La selección se realiza in situ o en el almacén, eliminando todos los frutos que no cumplan las características establecidas por el reglamento. Aquí vemos la transformación del producto estrella, la castaña, y el envasado, desde que aparece en lo que se llama erizo, como aparece en el árbol, las distintas preparaciones manuales, hasta el embotado. El segundo protagonista del Bierzo es el pimiento. Aquí vemos desde la producción, recolección, el asado junto con la castaña. Vemos otra preparación hasta que llega al tarro. Otra preparación del pimiento, que es el secado y la monturación para obtener un producto fácilmente soluble en cierto tipo de preparaciones. Otros productos son el tomate, la cebolla, el ajo, y otro producto estrella de la zona, estrella número 1, es la cereza. ¿Qué problema representa la ganadería? Se trata de explotaciones de tamaño familiar, de muy pequeño tamaño, con excesiva parcelación, sufren también el envejecimiento poblacional y siniestros por fauna salvaje, predominantemente jabalí y el ataque de lobos. El turismo de la zona es arqueológico, histórico, con el Camino de Santiago fundamentalmente, y de naturaleza. Las conclusiones de nuestro trabajo resumimos en dos aspectos. Respecto a la mujer, mantenimiento poblacional evitando el desarraigo y duelo del emigrante, pervivencia de tradiciones que unen a la propia tierra, fortalecen vínculos y crean alianzas, actividad socialmente integradora y dinamizadora. Amplía y expande tanto la mente como las expectativas laborales de la mujer, al proporcionarle experiencias empresariales antes vedadas exclusivamente al hombre. Implica y ejercita agilidad física y mental para ciertos procedimientos de mercado, lo cual supone un taller de ejercicio mental, social y biológico. Imprime rutinas relacionales que repercuten positivamente en su salud mental, creando vínculos, desarrollando habilidades y competencias, expande la mente más allá de los límites de las actividades del hogar, trascendiendo el mero papel de mujer cuidadora. El sentimiento de pertenencia a grupo evita el aislamiento de la mujer rural. Es una vía preventiva que aleja del problema zonal secularmente endémico, el alcoholismo. Segundas conclusiones son respecto a la propia actividad mercantil. Se trata de una actividad sostenible, respetuosa con el medio ambiente. Supone una adaptación de la actividad agrícola con medios modernos para seguir subsistiendo y obteniendo rentabilidad. La innovación de lo artesano y ecológico supone un plus añadido. Es un banco de ideas, diversificando e innovando para ampliar mercado y satisfacer incluso a los requisitos y a las mayores exigencias. Para conocer a los turistas y a los caminantes del Camino de Santiago los productos propios que exportan así nuestras ideas. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Muchas gracias, profesora. También felicidades por el trabajo bien hecho. Muchas gracias.
Gracias a vosotros.
Right now, we continue with another presentation from Professor Ashrus Talwar and Vidi Narang. Yes, they are presenting the topic titled in India's Missing Working Women, Tracing the Journey of Women's Economic Contribution over the last 7 decades and during COVID-19. To add to this, I would say Professor Ashrus Talwar is currently an associate at IDINSIDE. He has previously worked with Nikore Associates in the capacity of research manager and advisor. He holds master's degree in economics from Terry School of Advanced Studies and bachelor degrees in economics from St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi. Also, Professor Vidi Narang, he is research advisor at Nikore Associates. Vidi is currently pursuing a master's in public policy at the National Law School of India University, Bangalore. She holds an undergraduate degree in economics and is keen on working in the social development sector. Her interest areas include gender justice and public finance. I would ask you to start your presentation. Thank you.
I'm afraid they're experiencing some technical problems. They are not online now. So maybe we can continue with the Q&A. And as soon as she comes back, we can return to her presentation.
Yes, so we continue with the last presentation, and then we go back with the Ashrus Talwar's presentation. So we are going to listen to the presentation that titled.
Amir, they are not here. They are not here neither.
They are not here.
Nope.
I think they had problem because before I checked, I think one of them they were here. No.
Yes. So, she's back. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. So sorry, got disconnected.
Okay. Okay. Vidi, may I ask you to start your contribution? Thank you.
Sorry. Could you repeat? I just got connected.
Yeah. May I ask you in a favor to start your presentation? Thank you.
Yeah. Just my co-author is just joining. He's having trouble joining in, so he has the presentation. If we can just wait 1 minute.
Sure. Take it easy.
He's saying he's there, but I can't see him. He has been joined as a participant. Is it possible to make him the panelist? Yeah. Yeah, Ashrus Talwar.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, Ashrus. Yeah.
Okay. Just putting on the PPT. Is it viewable?
Yeah, it's visible. It's correct. Yeah. So I'll begin now. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining in. I'm Vidhi, and I'm currently based in Bangalore in India. I also have my co-author Ashut Talwar joining, and together we'll be presenting our research on tracing Indian women's economic contribution and during the last 7 decades and during COVID-19. Next slide, yeah. So the motivation for this research was based out of the fact that over the last 2 to 3 years, India has been touted as one of the fastest growing economies with considerable gains in education and fertility rates. So we were just made to wonder how India's women were contributing to this exceptional growth. So after studying the data from the National Sample Survey in India, we found that the female labor force participation which is the number of women who are looking for work, was only 17.5% in 2017-18, which is the lowest it has been since independence. So this motivated us to look into what were the key institutional and socio-cultural factors which were responsible for such a low female participation rate. And all of this has just been aggravated during COVID-induced lockdowns, and we found that women have been disproportionately impacted because of the lockdowns, which Ashut will talk about later. Ashut, next slide. Yeah, next. Yeah. So on this slide, you can see the labor force participation rate in urban India and rural areas for population 15 years and above, which is the working age population. So as you can see, the difference between the male and female labor force participation has remained around 40% over the last 40 percentage points over the last 5 decades. It's remained quite constant. And especially for women in rural areas, the labor force participation has almost halved from 53% in 1980s to 30% in 2019. So while those in urban areas, the decline was not as steep. So we can conclude that the exodus of rural women from the labor force was a key driver of falling labor force participation rate for women in India. Next slide. Right. So so we saw that while urban areas did see an increase in the proportion of regular or salaried workers, casual labor remained the norm for women in rural areas. And moreover, the gender wage gap, which is the difference of the wages earned by men and women, has remained sticky for the last 3 decades, and it has remained above 60%. So the reason behind these trends we found were that men tend to migrate to urban areas as rural wages are lower than urban wages, leaving women behind in low-paying rural jobs. And the sticky stereotypes of women's work being labor-intensive, coupled with low levels of their skilling, it led to women performing unskilled and helper roles even in the organized manufacturing sector, resulting in even lower wages for them in the urban areas. In the urban areas, further, women even bear something called as a motherhood penalty, which has been termed as a career break or loss of employment due to childbirth. And ultimately, the perception and positioning of women as a supplementary wage earner and not as a primary wage earner, it explains the existence of a gender pay gap, even when a man and a woman are at a similar educational and experience level in terms of work in the same industry. Next slide. Right. So even though India did witness a structural change in terms of level of output, moving from an agriculture-based economy to a more service sector-driven economy, this did not transform the structure and nature of women's employment. So while the proportion of rural men engaged in agriculture fell steeply from the 1970s to the 2019, as they moved to higher-paying sectors such as construction and manufacturing, a majority of rural women still continue to be engaged in agriculture activities, as you can see on the graph. In the urban areas, we did see an increase in employment in the service of women in the service sector from around 35% in 1970s to now 63% in 2019. They were still confined to very specific feminized sectors and jobs like teaching, nursing. They were very much involved in the hospitality industries. Next slide. Another reason another key reason we found was the increase in mechanization and automation, especially in the agricultural and textile sectors, which since they are the sectors which are predominantly, they were labor intensive and they did employ a majority of women. The increase in mechanization disproportionately affected women in these sectors. And because of their low literacy and skill levels, women were forced to remain engaged in work which was still labor intensive and low skilled, and hence they still got low wages than men. Next slide. So the withdrawal of women, as I talked about, over the last 3 decades was also accompanied by an increase in household income. And it was observed that families tend to withdraw women from labor force as a sign of prosperity, which was termed as Sanskritization of the labor force. So women whose partners hold regular employment or have post-secondary education are less likely to work owing to household income safety net. Like since their partners are able to work, women were not encouraged to go out and work even more. Next slide. Right. So the next reason was obviously social norms. And in India, we know that a woman's decision to work is never entirely hers. Like it's deeply influenced by various social factors like family support, her marital status, childcare, mobility restrictions. And we found that only 54% of women were allowed to go to a nearby market alone. And only 48% of them could even visit places outside of their village or outside of their towns by themselves. And it's also known that women are less likely to own or control their personal or family transport, which again puts a lot of mobility restrictions on them to go out and look for work and even just go to work. Next slide. So yeah, so this is a very interesting reason which we found was that between 1990s to last year 2019, the highest proportion of women engaged in the workforce were either from the illiterate category or the ones who had completed higher levels of education, that is with a diploma or a postgraduate degree. So in urban areas, the female workforce participation increased for women in the middle and higher education groups, showing that women were moving to high levels of schooling, and then they were joining the workforce in urban areas. But again, they were joining sectors which were low paid and which were low skilled sectors. Right. So, and all of these reasons which I talked about, they're even exaggerated because of the lockdowns. And I think Ashruth will just take over now.
Thanks, Vidhi. So how we went about, documenting this impact of COVID-19 was that we conducted almost 67 qualitative interviews with over 60 organizations and individuals to understand how COVID-19 has impacted women over the 2 waves of COVID-19 as we had them in India. And as you can see, although a majority of these organizations and individuals whom we interviewed were functioning out of Delhi and Maharashtra, we were able to achieve pan-India reach with our interviews in terms of reaching all different states of the country. And what we found essentially was that women were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, which culminated in how I like to call it a 5-pronged hit on their economic, social, and cultural well-being. And I'm going to just take the next 4-5 minutes to go over each of these points. The first hit came in terms of greater job and income losses. So with regards to employment, as you can see on the slide as well, and as we were looking at data, we found out that the size of the women's labor force shrunk by 14%, while the male labor force shrunk by only 2%. Further, as a result of the pandemic, women were being pushed into rural jobs. And there's a plethora of research which has documented that rural jobs, especially in India, are marked by low pay as well as a lack of social security. Additionally, even women entrepreneurs who form almost 20% of the micro, small, and medium industry in the country experienced disproportionate losses in earnings and revenue, and were not able to pivot their businesses due to some of the reasons that I'm going to discuss further. And the worrying point in terms of these job and income losses was that our consultations also revealed this, but also a lot of data that was coming out from various sources told us that in the informal and unorganized sector, which employs over 90% of India's labor force, our consultations revealed that men were being preferred for re-employment instead of women. The second hit, which came because of COVID-19, was in terms of increased mobility restrictions. And as Vidhi has already pointed out, female agency and mobility in India was already quite restricted, and the pandemic exacerbated that further. This essentially culminated in the lack of access to public transport, and as well as increased domestic and family induced restrictions in terms of why do you need to go to places, where are you going, just not having that independence, whatever limited independence that women had before COVID-19 got wiped out because of COVID-19. And how it, I think how we found that this plays out is it really limits opportunities for women to leverage, new opportunities for them to leverage in the face of the pandemic. We saw that with women entrepreneurs. We saw that with informal workers as well, that they were just not able to move out of their households to, look for jobs or to expand their businesses or reopen their businesses. The third of the five-pronged hit that I mentioned earlier was in terms of the increased burden of domestic work. And one thing to note here is that, even before COVID-19, of course, globally, we know that women do almost 3 to 4 times the amount of care work that men do. But in India, that was almost 10 times more care work that women were doing. And again, a lot of research and evidence suggests that this increased by almost 30 to 40% as families stayed indoors, as children were at home and had to sort of be looked after. It was the women of the household who were having to take up a lot of that responsibility. And another thing here to note, I'll just also move forward to the relevant slide here, is that a lot of the organic and ground level solutions that were coming from community organizations, civil society organizations like community-based childcare centers had to close down as a result of the pandemic. And why that's bad is because, again, research, especially based in India, has showed that these childcare centers have helped to reduce the care work burden of women in areas that they operate, and also increase their labor force opportunities and thereby financial security and independence. And the fourth hit of the pandemic was in terms of exacerbating pre-existing gender-based digital divides. So women, prior to COVID-19 had, relatively lower access to mobile and internet. And, what have we seen during the pandemic? We have seen, this whole culture of work from home, of moving to digital platforms. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're, working with a company, then you're working from home. And due to this pre-existing limited access to mobiles and internet, it was, essentially the women who bore the brunt. And, our consultations revealed very interesting anecdotes in terms of, young boys being preferred or prioritized for device usage for schools, while young girls were, sort of forced to support their mothers in fulfilling domestic responsibility. And education is just, one part of the picture when it comes to the digital divide. The second, was also in terms of entrepreneurship. So women entrepreneurs that, we spoke with a lot of associations and, independent entrepreneurs, and almost all of them told us that, we do not have a digital know-how to pivot to new platforms and to leverage new opportunities. And that's why they, in most cases had to sort of shut down their businesses. And the last, I think, is something that, I think we've faced in almost all countries, but, in India, we also saw saw that along with the COVID-19 pandemic, there was also the shadow pandemic of domestic violence. And, as families stayed indoors and there were increased intra-household tensions because of, job losses, income losses, and just, a lot of people being cramped into a space, various agencies were reporting increases in domestic violence. And one thing important to note with, domestic violence is always that the actual incidence of domestic violence is often a very, very large multiple of what is reported. So what was being reported was likely just the tip of the iceberg, and we'll probably keep seeing the effects of it over time. With that, we sort of come to the sort of concluding section of our paper, where we provided a robust set of recommendations for policymakers, and we'll just go over that very quickly in brief. So our recommendations prescribe a mix of global best practices as we saw them through various research that was being made available by multilateral organizations, but also to expand some of our own like sort of domestic Indian well-intentioned policy measures. The first being cash transfers for vulnerable women. These were this was a scheme, or this was a policy measure that was extended at the time of the pandemic, but we believe that it required a much greater quantum, as well as over a longer period, to really enable women to leverage that money in useful and productive ways. The second would be to incentivize retaining women informal workers. So as I mentioned, the informal sector employs over 90% of India's workforce. And at this point, through subsidies and other incentives, it's really important that enterprises have that incentive to retain women and not employ this policy of hire and fire. The third would be supporting women-owned businesses, and we've seen various examples of this in Colombia, in Turkey, Morocco, Cambodia, and Egypt as well, which have either extended credit lines or are providing grants or have created specialized digital forms. And it's at this crucial juncture where if we want to build back better, we need to really support these different branches of our economic recovery, as I like to call it. And the fourth would be better pay for our frontline health workers. We've seen, we spoke with a lot of frontline health workers, and this has been documented over the years as well, that they do not have enough social security, they do not get paid enough, they're not recognized as government workers, and hence do not enjoy a lot of the benefits that come with it. And they have really been at the forefront of our pandemic response. So it's important that we we strengthen that system and also provide the right incentives to these workers for future health emergencies. Over to you, Vidhi.
Yeah, I'll just conclude. So in terms of long-term recovery measures, we look at three common areas which we feel that the government, the private sector, the public sector all should work on together. So the first and foremost is the central government needs to increase the proportion of gender budget, which is currently averaging only around 5%, and it has been constant since 2008, since it was introduced. So we need a boost in the gender budget so that the state level and the district level authorities can better implement gender sensitive programs. The second is that all the public and private stakeholders working with the government need to collect gender disaggregated data as a default, so that we can we can make more better targeted policies when it comes to making gender targeted policies. And the third is that women's representation in disaster based responsive decision making must increase at all levels, like starting from the district going to the national level. It needs to increase the likelihood of gender sensitive policy making, and not just targeting at gender, but it has to be gender sensitive. and just like to conclude by saying that India needs to keep its women at heart while planning its economic recovery, and to create more opportunities to bring the women who have been missing from its workforce back into the spotlight. Thank you so much, and we'll take questions at the end.
Thank you for your presentation. So Vanya, just remained one presentation, but Professor Kwanda didn't answer to our invitation. Maybe he has some technical problem. So I suggest to go ahead with the question and answer. And then if he joins us, he has his 15 minutes of the presentation. So now it's turn to open a debate and make the question. Please raise your hand by press the button of raise hand on the Zoom. Then we can continue on the turn of the question and answer. Please, Professor Hiron.
Yes, please, Bidi, will you take out your screen, please? Okay. Yes, I would like to make some comments. And the first comment is for Melissa. You have explained very well your paper, and it has at least 15 divisions where you manage all the microenterprise, women in microenterprise, and also the how they have been the development in Sri Lanka. But one of my question is, of course, I agree that to have a micro enterprise, you can empower women. The problem is that in these studies, when you try to work with micro enterprise, there is a microcredit, and there are a lot of macrofinance institutions that gives the credit to these micro enterprises, women's enterprises. Is that correct? Are you understanding me?
Actually, no. We just went door to door through the town. There was not a requirement of microcredit. It was just whether or not an occupant in the house was a woman entrepreneur.
Yes, but the thing is that, so do you give them credits or not?
No, I did not. No, that work had been done. So I could go into the town and know that already there was an empirical basis that the women there were not using the resources. The same resource given to them was not benefiting the business to the same extent as the men. So I built on that opportunity to say, okay, so why not? Right? We already know that's an issue. I don't have to worry about the business resource issue. I want to dig into the other issues, right, that might be at play. And so it just provided an opportunity.
Yes, I agree with that. But the question is, who pays the microcredit?
So, I mean, that's not something I controlled for or worried about. So originally the work built out of NGO programming, because I started looking into this about 10 years ago. And actually more recently, as reflected in this presentation, the policy implications are becoming, and the state level implications in this decade that I've been looking at this topic are becoming much more interesting and potentially problematic. So last year with LADYSMITH, we did the Beijing 25 progress report for all of Asia Pacific, so 57 countries. And there was a really interesting conflation in these government reports of whether entrepreneurship is under the decent work category or a social protection strategy for poor women. And so it's kind of at this decision point that I'm really trying to pull out information and data so that we can be very clear, right, about what approach is being taken, and then design appropriate policy spaces and support services depending on who you're targeting, what their vulnerabilities are, what their capacities are, what their aspirations are. So yes, I think that who pays is actually a very important question, especially when we know what we know about women's enterprises as far as being smaller and less remunerative, and this higher level of indebtedness, this lower aspect of control. Again, if we look at this in the SDG context, right, to what extent are we balancing the imperatives around poverty, gender equality, and decent work at the same time? Because there seems to be this tug that's not really being analyzed enough, in my opinion. We're not being very clear. We're not thinking through either at the NGO support level, obviously the financial institution level, that's not happening. At the state level, that's not happening. And I think that's for all women entrepreneurs, not just microfinance. You could make the same argument for the mompreneurs in Europe and the West who are pushed into entrepreneurship to balance their family responsibilities, right? If you can't balance your life, then you start a business and then you can do both. And so again, the messaging around entrepreneurship as a tool to maintain and allow women to exist within existing constraints, or as a way to expand those constraints and what I think development should do, right? To expand the menu of opportunities that they're presented with, is not a steady part of the conversation, right? And so I think who pays is a wonderful way to start opening up a lens, right, a perspective on these discussions. Did that answer? Did that get to your question?
Yes, I agree with you. The problem for me is, as I have been studying the interest rate and the profits that all these people that gives the money has won during this period. Mm-hmm. And that's why I was asking you if there is the study, because when you give a credit, someone has to pay.
Yeah.
No, I don't know, maybe the woman or a society, but the credit must be paid. Yeah. And the problem of these microcredits is the interest rate. Mm-hmm. That it's women are very profitable. That's the question. That's why I'm not seeing if it is good, if it is a decent work. No, the credit, especially at the end of this point, we must see how much that was the cost of this woman empowerment and the profits that they have by the microfinance institution. But that was my question. But
I mean, I will say, interestingly, my participants within that community in Sri Lanka, they did not have a positive view of savings groups, right? We hear a lot in the Indian context for the self-help groups, and for the women in Sri Lanka, the self-help group was seen as sort of just as exploitative, right? With interest rates and lack of control. It was for lower women. If you were really needy, you would do that, but there was a social cost that came with applying to the self-help group. And so, I think definitely the way we define finance and the way we structure it is a very important part of this. Again, taking this conversation away from men versus women helps us to really understand a little bit differently, to really dig deeper into within, what is differentiating women that are meeting kind of our ideal outcomes and women that aren't, and using that as a door. So
okay,
wonderful.
Thank you, Melissa. Well, Amir.
Thank you, Professor Hiron. Also, I want to ask to Professor Melissa, again, thank you for your presentation. Actually, it was a great presentation and you have done a very great job. My point of view actually is close to the Professor Hiron, but in another aspect. She's concerning about the cost of microfinancing. And I would ask you about the benefits, because the society that you had the questionnaires and your analysis, it was based on the questionnaires. And I mean that all your recommendations, since pandemic, actually, we have learned that there are new mechanisms of financing, and especially in the societies like Sri Lanka, India, and other societies with big proportion of the informal economy. I think in Sri Lanka, it's more or less 60 or 70% of the economy is informal. So we saw that since pandemic, some new mechanism just became into the markets. and some mechanism just more bolded, like crowdfunding. I would to know in your study how the society that you studied got benefits from this kind of the mechanism that brought to the societies, or there are some missing in the study, or we can mention at all that is in Sri Lanka you didn't find any kind of the contribution from the new mechanism of informal financing. Thank you.
Yeah, so those tools were not applicable in the region where I was. I think just from my other work on the topic, I would caution new tools with gender sensitive tools. From what we know and what our colleagues talked about in the Indian context, as far as the gender digital divide, what we know about women in venture capital raising, right, in all financial institutions, right, experiencing so many kinds of discrimination in accessing financial tools, bar none. So I think I would be a little hesitant to assume that new and technologically driven equals in some way more equitable. And so potentially there's a seed for work with that. But among the women in Kandy, Sri Lanka, these were not, no, I mean, own savings, family investments, right? Some bank and microcredit access, but it was fairly simple in those terms.
Thank you very much. Now I see Veronica has a question. Sorry, Veronica, because I think you raised your hand for a long time. I'm sorry, I didn't pay attention. Please go ahead, Veronica. Veronica, can you hear me?
I don't see any Veronica.
Not in panelists, in attendees. Okay, so please raise your hand for the question. If there is any questions, if not, I'm going ahead with another questions on the last presentation from Astro Taular and Vidi. So we don't have any questions. So I go ahead, Professor Siron.
No. Go ahead you first, and then I will make my question to Vidi and ask her.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. It was really great job. But I have one question regarding to. Could you go ahead with your slide, please, on the education part? I think it was the last slide.
Yeah, one second. Ashut, can you share the slide?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just a second. Are you talking about this slide?
No, it was one slide about the I think this one. Yeah, rural and urban female education level. And as you mentioned, there is huge gap between the rural and urban female by education level. But my question is related to how we can distinguish these differences, because if we divide very simply like urban and rural, we are not considering some elements, like, for example, it could be the culture, or it could be infrastructure. Maybe there are some rural area, they don't have any infrastructure and the government doesn't support students and the young people to go to the school. So in your point of view, these huge differences is related to the infrastructure, is related to the culture, and how you can distinguish between these huge differences. And also I can see the trend is goes down from 2004 from high level of the percentage to lower level in both areas. Could you explain how we can distinguish and what is the reason and how we can empower vulnerable groups, and especially in this case, how we can empower women to get more educated in the society, same as India? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So there is not a lot of difference in terms of where women are employed with respect to their education level between rural and urban areas. The trend is almost the same. The finding that we had was that a large proportion of women employed in both the areas came from either the not literate category, where they had very little or less than primary level of education, or they had higher levels of education. So they had diplomas or postgraduate degrees. So that was the finding in both urban and rural areas. But what you said is correct. Like the infrastructure, social norms, all of these really matter in how these higher levels of education translate into women getting jobs. And this is what we actually found as well, that even though the enrollment ratios have been rising in both urban and rural area for primary and secondary education, these ratios have not translated into women getting jobs. So one reason which we found, and even I think it's quite it's true, that women lack access to training, skills training, so that they can be employed in higher skilled or high paying jobs. In the sense, even the skilling in rural areas is very restricted to, let's say, handicrafts or textile sector. Like and even when they have access, it's limited to these sectors. But even otherwise, very few women have access to these training institutes. Whether and the reasons are multiple. Like it could be social norms, that the institutes are placed really far from their house, or their societal, their family or the society doesn't allow them to get those skills or to enter those high paying and high skills job. So I think the only solution could be to enhance or expand the scope of the skills that you're providing women, and not just restrict them to these feminized sectors. Like as I mentioned earlier also, women are just restricted to hospitality and tourism and mostly teaching, education sector. So we need to, and these are very low paying sectors. So there is no scope for them to progress here. That's I think that should be it.
Thank you for your answer. I think Professor Khiron has a question regarding to this presentation. Thank you, Prof.
The microphone. Sorry. Yes, you have at least 5 impact of COVID. The first one is gender, job, and income losses. The second one, mobility restrictions. The third one, unpaid care work. The fourth, digital gender divide. And the shadow pandemic of domestic violence. And I think when I was seeing this disproportionate impact of COVID, it is not only for India, it is around the world. So I would like to hear more about this impact that you study in India. I don't know if you can't say more about how this has been, even if it is here and you explain it very well. But I would like to know if you can put a little bit of examples, or how did you arrive to those 5 elements?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think definitely on your first point about this being more of like a global phenomena, I think we all definitely agree on that. There's a lot of evidence to suggest increase in care work and just women being less likelier to be employed the world over. But I think how we really saw it in India was through 2 ways, and that's how we did our research as well. One was through secondary data, which was being collected by both the government and private sources. And you can see some of these graphs that we've tried to build from there. And the second was through on ground consultations with associations that were working with women or women themselves, be it entrepreneurs or be it informal workers, and really trying to understand, okay, what were there was this data which was telling us that women's labor, for example, women's labor force shrunk by 14%, whereas men's labor force shrunk only by 2%. But what did that actually mean on the ground? And that was the whole point of the qualitative interviews that we conducted. And we found that a lot of this a lot of these stories, which were which a lot of the work that we're doing now also is about getting the stories from the ground onto to digital platforms and to people who can actually make a difference, is that a lot of these losses in income, in jobs, and increase in care work were not being captured through other formats. So I think that was one way that we realized that our qualitative sort of interviews were really able to add value to a lot of research and commentary that was going on already. And also we found some interesting examples. I didn't have the time at that time to go over these, but we found a lot of organic solutions that community organizations were coming up during the pandemic to support women. So, for example, there is a community-based organization, which is the Mandesi Foundation. It's world-renowned, and it's a financial services enterprise essentially. And how it supported women that it was working with was by providing these low-interest loans for buying smartphones. And what it found was that 80% of women who it was working with availed of this scheme, were able to sort of come back into the economics, the economic space, or the labor force, whatever you want to call it, and were able to expand their businesses, go back to their jobs. And that I think that was also one focus of our research effort, not just to document the experiences and the stories of women from the ground, but also to bring out these really ground level organic solutions that can be implemented fairly at low cost, but also at large level. Because I think we as all authors of this paper actually just believe that a lot of these solutions have their answers in within communities and on the ground. And these are either not being leveraged enough, or where they are being leveraged, the message or the structure or the systems of those solutions is not reaching out to different places. So I think one idea was definitely this, that whatever recommendations we make should be reasonable, should be grounded in things that are low cost and are feasible and implementable on the ground. I hope I've answered your question, but happy to chat further.
Thank you very much. Amir, would you like to ask to the other panelists or make some comments? We only have
few minutes. Yeah.
6
Thank
minutes.
you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation. It was really clear. The work was really have done. But I have one question. Also, yesterday in another table, I made the same question. Maybe also Melissa can consider this on her marvelous work. especially you studied on the share of the woman at the job level in India. I would know how we can understand, because also all this happened since pandemic. We would to know how the proportional of the hierarchical level changed by pandemic, and how the women could empower, and how women could reach to the level, and how they change the hierarchical level at the managerial level. Because as we know, the managerial model is changing by time, and also all the crises could have impact on the theories. So in this case, how pandemic and how women struggle on the managerial level, and absolutely how they change these hierarchical positions. Thank you.
I'm sorry, is that a question?
I think it's a comment. No, but we only have 2 more minutes, and maybe we can make just a little bit comment to the paper of María de Los Ángeles and Gerardo. Would you like to make a comment, which is very interesting, and the principal objective, and also the comment to Mohammed, please?
Yes. Before that, maybe I will communicate by email with them to cover these comments about the hierarchical level. Sorry for the limitation time that we have, but I will contact with you. So I have a question. One moment. I have a question on the paper of Professor Sadiq Mohammed. Professor Sadiq Mohammed, are you there?
Yes, we see him.
Yes.
Can we see better your face, Professor Sadiq? That's better. We don't hear you. Your microphone.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
I have one critical question on the methodology. Actually, okay. I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand from the econometric point of view how gender differences impact economic capital assets. Yes. Because you have done a model for the long run, and actually as I can see, you have the negative coefficient, for the female ATET, and the positive coefficient on the male. How you can interpret this? Because I just got confused. Sorry. Thank you.
Right. If you look, we are talking about the impact of gender, isn't it? That is the long run. The ATE for the male and the ATE for the female. If you look at it, there are various average treatment estimation we have been conducted. The regression adjustment, are you hearing me? Hello?
Yes. Hello, I'm here. I'm hearing you.
The regression adjustment, definitely, there was an estimation on the basis of regression adjustment. Then there is that of the propensity score matching, and there is neighbor matching, and there is inverse probability weight. And if you look at it, definitely, the first one is TLU, total livestock units. Are you getting me? We have the total, because the capital there, definitely, there is that of the livestock unit, and there is that of the dead stocks. Are you getting me? Hello? Hello?
Yes, I'm hearing you. Please continue.
Yes. In the capital acquisition, there is that of the livestock, which is the TLU. There is that of the dead stocks, which has with the equipment, and there is that of what are they calling commercialization index. And the 80 average treatment effect normally shows definitely the difference. It shows the difference between the two groups. And if you look at it, that you said there is a negative sign. Actually, a negative sign is telling you definitely a discrepancies against the other group. Are you getting me? Hello?
Yes, I am hearing you. Please continue.
Yes. Yes, the negative sign is telling you definitely discrepancy against what are they calling it, the other group. That is, women definitely fall short of that very estimation, negative, compared to their male counterpart. While in the case of the average treatment effect on treated, which is ATET, is discussing about what happened within. And even within, because of that within tells you definitely how does gender discrimination as a factor within the woman. In this sense, it's talking about gender equity now, in terms of control of the resource equity. So in the equity now, it is telling you how equity definitely has affected definitely women, what are they calling access to what are they asset accumulation. That is within. Because the ATE is telling you between, while the ATET, which is the average treatment effect on treated, is telling you about what happened within the particular group, which is the women gender. And at the same time, you can see that of the male gender was average treatment effect on treated, ATEU. Hello, are you hearing me? So actually, that is the model is built on that average treatment effect, and it shows definitely, because by the time it tells you negative, it tells you that definitely the women group definitely as a result of gender discrimination, definitely they fall short of their male counterpart by that very percentage. While within definitely it is telling you how. Hello?
Hello.
Are you hearing
Yes,
me?
I got. Yeah. I got the point that I asked you. Maybe I will communicate by email for the contribution for our publication, and I will raise another comment on your work. I would ask to Profesor María de Los Ángeles. ¿Usted está aquí? Profesora.
Sí, dígame.
Sí. Muchas gracias por su presentación. Verdaderamente me gustó mucho. Tengo una pregunta que su trabajo verdaderamente es muy completo y era muy claro, pero tengo una pregunta que cómo digamos que la creatividad puede contribuir también a medio ambiente y cómo puede la creatividad, cómo puede contribuir a la sociedad, digamos, a nivel nacional, en vez de tener digamos, pequeñas empresas o pequeñas actividades. ¿Cómo podemos decir a los políticos para agendar una política de expandir algunas actividades, de tener creatividad de parte de mujeres, como que usted presentó, para, digamos, para solucionar algunos problemas, como medio ambiente, como reducir nivel consumación de energías fósiles o otros puntos que usted mencionó. Muchas gracias.
Una pregunta, una consideración francamente interesante, porque hemos elegido estas dos empresas por varios motivos, pero uno de ellos es que las propias empresas pueden ser una fuerte lección a políticos bueno, me voy a atrever a decir, a políticos de miras muy reducidas. Hay cuestiones que son inversiones a muy largo plazo, que en los cortos y medios plazos las rentabilidades o los beneficios pueden ser tan importantes o más como el largo plazo. citábamos el tema del alcoholismo en la zona. Ha sido muy, muy preocupante a nivel de la clínica zonal, porque el manejo económico de una zona que ha sido doble o triplemente carbonífera, el tema del wolframio, etcétera, etcétera, eso hacía incurrir en ciertos abusos, apartar a la mujer de ciertas actividades que podían ser industrial, docente, etcétera, etcétera, el acceso a la formación, el progreso como persona. Entonces, estos son unos ejemplos que los políticos tendrían que tomar como lo que una mujer puede llegar a hacer cuando tiene iniciativa, tiene un poco de terreno, etcétera, etcétera. Es una lección muy importante, yo creo, en ese sentido. Porque los políticos realmente, por lo menos los de la zona, me refiero a la zona del Bierzo, tienen la mente un poco cerrada. No quiero profundizar más, pero son un poco de miras muy cortas.
Muchas gracias. Verdaderamente usted mencionó a los puntos verdaderamente importantes, porque no podemos avanzar, digamos, cambiar la sociedad si no vamos a cambiar nuestra mentalidad.
Pequeño entorno,
profesor.
Gracias.
Muchas felicidades, María de Los Ángeles, realmente muy interesante, sobre todo de una zona que pocos conocemos y cómo se ha hecho esta transformación. Pues nosotros les damos muchísimas las gracias. Thank you very much for this panel, who has been great. And then, Amir, we will continue sharing you some information or asking some questions, but we have to move in 3 minutes to our other session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If you let me, I close the session by saying that actually we have successfully concluded this table on the conference. First of all, I want to thank you in very special way to everyone contributed to this table. And however, I want to thank the team that has been in the charge of the preparation detail, both in logistic aspect and the technical part, for importance of the work. Actually, they all undertook their work, characterized, and the dedication, and a special thanks to Professor Hiron, who provide valuable support with her experience, and also a special thanks to my colleagues Vanya and Daniela. I would like to mention that I'm pleased to thank participation in this event, and finally we share phrases by a famous phrase from the Nelson Mandela: education is most powerful weapon that can be used to change the world. Thank you, and I wish you all successes, and see you in the next meeting within 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Amir, and thank you to the team of Dapuea, who is here with Javier, Jose Luis, Vanya, and Daniela, who has been sharing a lot of emails.